what that you can understand from both of these narrations, that if in early Islam you wanted to show humility, khushu and khudu in your outlook, then you would wear wool. Because that was a simple form of clothing in those days. Although this is the strongest opinion, you could argue, as a criticism of this, that it's kind of difficult to name a whole discipline and to refer to a whole group of people just based on the clothing that they are wearing. That you might argue that, you know, Sufism is an inner discipline, isn't it? It's about how you feel. What does the clothes say about you? So it's difficult to judge a person just based on the clothes that they wear. But however, in defense of that, you could argue, as a counter-defense of that, you could argue that there are certain clothing that when you wear it, although it's just the clothing which is covering your back, it can affect the way that you act and the way your attitude towards others is. And the prime example of that, the ihram that we wear when we go on Hajj and Umrah. That is a simple cloth, isn't it? Just two white cloths, and you could argue just covering your body. But think about what it does to your mind and soul once you wear that ihram. That it totally converts you into a pious person. You show that humility. And even in this day and age, we do judge people and we do name people according to their clothes. The juvenile delinquents of our society in this day and age, what do we call them? Call them hoodies. So again, we're just judging them according to the clothes that they are actually wearing. The third opinion is that in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there were poor, ascetic, very simple, poor, needy Muslims who lived with the Prophet ﷺ in Masjid al-Nabawi. And they took on the name of Ashab al-Suffa, the companions of the bench. The likes of Sayyidina Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala, and the likes of Sayyidina Ibn Abbas and so forth. These Muslims were very simple, they had no work to go to. All of their time and all of their effort was spent in the service of Islam. So according to one opinion of scholars, Sufism as a discipline takes its name from Sufa, which means bench. So in the same way that these companions, they sat in the company of the pious, in the company of the Prophet ﷺ, that is something which the Sufi aspires to as well. That he seeks the company of the good. In the same way that Ashab al-Sufa spent all of their time in the mosque and spent their time in the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is exactly what the Sufi tried to do as well. The negative aspect of this interpretation, again, you can probably appreciate that the word Sufa does not directly derive from tasawwuf. This is made up from the root letters of Swad, Fa and Fa. So grammatically, there again are shortcomings in this interpretation. The same goes for the next one as well. When we stand for Salah and we are in the road, then the Imam will tell us to ensure that the saf is straight. Saf in Arabic means line or row. One opinion is that Sufism takes its name from saf, which means line or row. Because when you are standing about to perform Salah, then you are standing with discipline, with humility, all in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So symbolically, this is what the Sufi is trying to do. He is presenting himself with humility and discipline in the presence of God. This is one interpretation. Again, grammatically, however, it will not actually meet with the root word swad, waw, fa. Very briefly, other opinions about where the actual name comes from. There is one opinion. All of the opinions that I have given so far, you will appreciate that all of them have Islamic origins. And they are all related in all of these words. They're Arabic words. There is one interpretation, however, that says that the Sufism actually derives from a non-Arabic word. In the time of the great philosophers in Greece, the likes of Plato and Aristotle, there were a group of people called the sophists. And these are the people who loved wisdom, who loved philosophy, and just talk for the betterment of humankind. The word soph itself actually means what? It means wisdom, hikmah. And that's the word where we get the word philosophy from. Philosophy is Latin, which means love of wisdom. Philo means love in Latin. So philosophy actually means love of wisdom. So according to this opinion, and it is a very small and minority opinion, the word tasawwuf is taken from a non-Islamic source. It's taken from these Greek philosophers who love to talk about wisdom and who love to talk about the betterment of humankind. Again, a very minority, a small opinion. Abu Nu'aym reports in Al-Hilya, Al-Dastusi in his works, that prior to the Prophet ﷺ's appearance, in Makkah Sharif there was a certain period where there was absolutely no one to perform the tawaf around the Kaaba. That the place became totally barren. And that the Kaaba was just there, but there was no one there to actually circulate it. In this period appeared a person called Sufa. And Sufa came up from a very far off land. And on his own, he would come and alone he would perform the tawaf around the Kaaba. And then according to this opinion then, that Sufism is actually named after a particular person. That is taken from his name. Final opinion, again a minority opinion, an interesting one, is that in Arabic there's a word sufana. Sufana is a small plant which grows in the desert. And according to some scholars, the word Sufism takes its root from the word sufana. Why? Because this plant, in a barren desert, in the absence of water, in the absence of greenery, is able to sustain itself with the smallest of provisions. And in exactly the same way, that is what the Sufi aspires to. And what he wants. That he tries to nourish himself and sustain himself on the smallest of provisions. These are all the different opinions given about where the word actually comes from. Of all of these that we have gone through, I think I mentioned already, this is the strongest. This is the one where most scholars agree to. This is the one where grammatically it makes sense. Of all of these two are the weakest. Highly unlikely that a whole discipline would have taken its name from a non-Arabic source. The second reason for that is that if you read the works of Plato in the Republic, these sophists, okay, they were philosophers, and they were people who loved wisdom, but a lot of the time, Plato actually has a great problem with the sophists because they used to argue just for the sake of it. That they were what we call the devil's advocate. That they would just talk and talk and talk philosophy, but it would not get them anywhere. So although they were people who thought and contemplated, but there was no direction in what they actually said. This is weak, because it's suggesting that Sufism can be ascribed to a person called Sufa, one individual. And my own opinion is that if we are going to ascribe Sufism to one particular individual, then certainly it would be the Prophet ﷺ. Highly unlikely that we would ascribe it to a person who appeared before Islam. Having said that, the variety of opinions, and having said that this one is perhaps the strongest one, the interpretation of wood, all of them do add to our understanding of what Sufism is. Why? Because, go back to that, all of them help us to give us an indication, to paint a picture of what this discipline actually preaches. Ignore for a moment what I said about which is the strongest and which is the weakest. All of them can give us an understanding of what tasawwuf is actually about. Tasawwuf does preach purity. It is about the cleanliness of the soul. Tasawwuf, and most scholars will agree, is about simplicity, as expressed by wearing wool. Tasawwuf does find its roots from the time of the companions of Ridwanullahi alayhim ajma'in. It does preach simplicity, and it does preach just staying in the company of the pious. Sufism certainly does encourage and preach discipline, presenting yourself in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They do love wisdom. They like the hikmah. And even with this opinion, you could argue that the Sufi, he is totally oblivious of what is going on around him in this world. That he is just concentrating on what he wants to do, rather like this man. When he saw that no one else was doing the work, he was doing it himself. So he's totally cut off of what people are doing. And certainly, this last opinion can add to our understanding. That rather like a discipline